Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
We are in the Mackey Arena media room. It is the eve of Purdue opening Big Ten tournament play. They will play the winner of tonight's game between USC and Rutgers on Thursday at 9-ish. Check your local listings and keep up with whatever's going on in the game before that. But obviously, Purdue ending the season with a loss at Illinois, but ending the season, I thought, on a better trajectory than they had in the 4 games before that. Now, they played 4 really good teams, and 3 of them were on the road, and 2 really good teams in Indiana on the road, and a really good team at home that just caught fire one night in Wisconsin. I still thought that there was some positive uptick there at the end of the season, but I'm curious, Sam, for you, who's been here these last few years, to kind of contrast how important you think the Big Ten tournament is for this Purdue team as opposed to it was the last couple of years.
Yeah. So 3 years ago, before I was actually on this beat, Purdue had gotten to the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis and lost to Iowa, and it didn't feel like a big deal. It felt like that was a good sign going into the NCAA tournaments. It turned out to kind of maybe not be the case so much. The next year, Purdue is the 1 seed, wins the Big Ten regular season, and it felt like that team, really wanted to go make a statement because people thought, okay, maybe Purdue overachieved a little bit, and so Purdue was kind of going in still with a chip on its shoulder into that Big Ten tournament in Chicago, and ended up winning the Big Ten tournaments and being a 1 seed, which is really what the carrot was there. But then last year, it almost seemed like it was an afterthought. Like when Purdue lost to Wisconsin in the semis, nobody seemed to bat an eye. It was kind of like, okay, well, we get to go home on Saturday night, watch the selection show in West Lafayette, and kind of reset our focus for what last season kind of always seemed about, which was redeeming that 16 seed loss and making a run in the tournament and getting into the Final Four. And all season long last year, Purdue talked about winning a national championship. I think the stakes right now are a little different than even 2 years ago when Purdue still really wanted to win the title to make a statement. Because I don't know that it's going to shift your seat a whole lot, but losing 5 of 7, even though it was against really good teams, and even though these last 3 games, even with the loss, I think Purdue has made some significant strides here over the final 3 games of the regular season. You kind of need to make a run here to just correct yourself and get going in the right direction, get some momentum going into the NCAAs.
Yeah, I do think it is hard to project that it would make much difference on the seed line. I wrote about this a little bit earlier this week in some stuff I did for IndyStar.com, where you have to remember that when you are in this small cohort of teams, when you're talking about top 15 teams in the country, they're all winning this week, most of them. And even the ones that do lose are probably losing to another team in the top 15. By and large, unless you get upset, like if Purdue were to lose to USC or Rutgers, that would have more negative effect than most of the things that they could do this week would have positive effect. Now, maybe if you get all the way to the end and you pick up another win over a team like Maryland and Michigan along the way, you'd have to beat most likely, or Illinois, and then you beat a team like Wisconsin or Michigan State or whoever in the championship game. Like if you pick up enough of those, maybe that's enough to make the 4-3 difference. Like you're the worst 3 instead of the best 4 on the seed line or whatever. But really, you can't, I think, if you're Purdue's case, that's almost immaterial. Like it shouldn't almost be anything that's in your mind, really. It was in their mind Friday against Illinois. They knew that if they won that game, it gave them a chance for the double bye and open some things up in an easier path to those things for the Big Ten tournament. But for the NCAA tournament, I had almost put that on my mind. And I think it really has to be more about they are still in the process of becoming the team that the best case scenario of themselves that they envisioned coming out of the summer. I think they saw pieces there, and it got altered when Daniel Jacobson got hurt. But I think they saw pieces there that over the course of a season, and I remember us talking about this on this podcast at the time, it was going to be interesting to kind of watch this team evolve over time. And it has different lineups, different guys stepping up and being bigger in their roles and some unexpected things. I just think that that's what this week has to be about for them, kind of what you're getting at, is that this is a week about refinement, and it's a week about finally like really drilling down on doing some of the things that have created some of the leakage here. And really, we're just talking about defense there for the most part. Yes, I think the rebounding is always there. If you're playing another elite offensive rebounding team, that vulnerability is going to be there. And if you're playing a team that really can create a lot of turnovers and get after you, then that vulnerability is going to be there. I don't know that those are ever really going away, but if you can stabilize better defensively, it obviously helps offset that. And I think defense is when they look back at the Illinois game and they look back at that 4-game losing streak, defense is something that kind of kept recurring, that they just got away from what they wanted to be defensively. This is a week through practice and through whoever you play in Indianapolis where you can kind of hone in on getting back to that defensive identity first and foremost.
Yeah, and it needs to be consistent. And that's one of the things that I had written about after the Illinois game, because the rebounding, even though Purdue did not win the rebounding battle, it competed against the best team in the league. And I think Fletcher Lawyer and maybe somebody else said, we can't just want to rebound well because we're playing the best rebounding team in our league. We should want to rebound well because we need to do that every single night to win games. And it's the same way with defense. When Purdue really hones in and plays good defense consistently, it gives itself a chance. And Matt Painter keeps talking about we're taking good shots that we missed time and time again, but you still have to do the other facets of the game to put yourself into a position to where if you're not making those shots, you can still come away with a victory. And it starts on defense, because you're right. You know, I think back to that Michigan State game, and part of that was transition points, but they just had a dunk show throwing lobs over the top that Purdue didn't really adapt to until it was too late. Some
of the 2-point defense that has been a problem for them in the latter part of the second half of the season, it's hard to completely scrub out those live ball turnover points that they were giving up, because those are 2-point baskets almost always. It's almost always a breakaway layup or a dunk or a lob, and those aren't happening. Yes, you fail to prevent them, but they're happening against the defense in a different way than just half-court problems in the defense were happening. But they were still having plenty of half-court problems. Michigan State was the worst example of it, where it felt like they just got whatever they wanted at some point, lobbing the ball in. And just keeping the ball out of the post has to be a focus, I think, going forward. And it's the one thing too that I feel is like the most individual. The individuals can control the most. Rebounding also, and I suppose ball control to a certain extent. But with defense, the way that they talk about defense here, even though they do have a vulnerability with no Daniel Jacobson, when you talk to coaches, when you talk to players, and sometimes players are just mimicking coaches, I get that, because that's what they're being told is what's wrong with them or what needs to be better. But you get just this constant drum of like, well, we play well and we do the right thing, and that's why we're leading. That was something else Fletcher Lawyer was saying after the game at Illinois was, we're doing the right things. That's why we're getting the lead. That's why we're ahead. We're playing well. And then they just don't sustain it. And I thought Matt Painter said something today that was a good point, which is that's what inconsistency is. It's not being bad, because bad teams, and he didn't name any, but I could name you some. Purdue might be about to play a couple. Like bad teams just do it bad all the time. Inconsistent teams will show you that they can do it. They just fail to do it consistently. Hence inconsistency for all of you non-English majors out there. So I that has been, I think, when you're looking at teams and what flaws they would have late in a season, I think you would much rather be a team that has shown inconsistency on defense as opposed to a team that has shown an inability to play defense. I think those are two different things. And I thought Brian Newbert, our colleague from Golden Black, was asking a really interesting question today to some people, which was, do you think the one and done nature can help bring about that defensive focus that has been lacking? And I think the best answer to that, Matt Painter said something like, I hope so. But I get what he's saying from there, that sometimes those external things can help you focus in a way that you maybe otherwise wouldn't. Yeah, you definitely adapt to the situation, especially in a one and done. And you're going to see it with lineups. Guys are going to get their minutes squeezed or not, get minutes at all, who have been being inserted into the lineup at points this year, because you just feel like as you're developing, you have to play guys or you have to see which lineups work together. That's not the case anymore. Goes the same way with elements of the game, from defense to rebound and whatever. You can't afford to have kind of an off night or an inconsistency, because that, ultimately could be what becomes the end of your season. So now it's just you're playing for 40 minutes and you worry about the next day when and if you get to it. It's interesting coming out of the Illinois game. I think you and I both had a similar vibe coming out of that game as we walked off the floor, which was that was a really good game, and Purdue played pretty well, maybe even better than it thought it might have to in some aspects of that game, especially from a rebounding perspective. Didn't really commit a lot of turnovers. We're not giving away possessions in a way that has sunk them in the past. And I looked back to like how many bunnies Trakoff and Wren missed in the first half that seemed like they would normally go in for him. How many of those threes? Like Braden Smith was getting good looks at the end of that game. They just weren't falling. Like you could easily find the 8 points in shots that normally go in. I thought that was a game where it was the most encouraging loss that they could have, I suppose, going into. And I think it told you more about where this team was right now than the Rutgers game did. Because, okay, you blew the roof off of Rutgers at home. Congratulations. That team was trying to play defense telepathically for most of that game. Like now you're on the court against a real team. No offense to Steve Pikiell's group. Like Illinois is a team that people don't want to play in the NCAA tournament. And to get on the court with them and push it into the last couple minutes and lose a game in that arena on the road and have some regrets about some possessions that got away, I found that to be as encouraging as either the win over UCLA or Rutgers, just because of especially because it's on the road. And I think Purdue still, there is such a disparity between what it has been at home and on the road.
Yeah, and those 8 points, some of those were late free throws that separated that. It really was a Kasparis, and I'm going to butcher his last name, Yakiyasonis, something of that sort. I just call him Kasparis, or they call him KJ, I think, in Champaign. Jakashonis. He made a tough three to give Illinois the lead in that game, which is the shot, especially the way he was shooting that night, that you would want him to take in that situation. And it just happened to go in. And that was kind of the shot that sparked Illinois onto the victory. So, you take that kind of in stride and realize those things happen at times.
He wasn't even shooting that much that night. I remember going late into that game, keeping track, at least late into the first half, because CJ Cox comes out and gets the assignment on him at the start, which is very common to how they do that. And Jackson, he's just not shooting the ball. Like I don't think he had a shot in like the first 12 minutes. And I thought that was notable. And it was not just CJ Cox. Eventually, it was other guys getting in on that, but they were doing a good job limiting him. Now, they were not doing a good enough job limiting the plan B, C, D that the Illinois had that night. It would have been more encouraging, obviously, if Purdue had found a way to win a game on the road where both teams are scoring in the 80s. And it is the one thing that is part of their uncertainty right now going into the NCAA tournament, into the postseason in general. And I'm including this week at the Big Ten tournament because we've already seen them on a neutral court against a really good team at Cambridge Fieldhouse, and they didn't play well enough to win against Texas A&M. And I do think that this team, I was trying to remember the last time they beat a team that we would say is really good outside of Mackey Arena. And I think it was Thanksgiving. I think it was Ole Miss. And they've had other chances since then, whether that was they did beat Michigan since then. I guess that would probably be the other one.
That was at Mackey Arena, though.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that was at Mackey. Right. So away from Mackey Arena, like when was the last time they beat a really good team? I can't really, and this would have been a chance to notch another one of those, and it got away, just as it did at Indiana when they were up by 12 at halftime or whatever it was, just as it did at Michigan State when they had a first half lead, just as it did against Michigan. Like the opportunities where they just couldn't finish it off. And I do wonder is that just a part of this team's character that it's maybe going to not be able to finish off those wins when it doesn't have Mackey Arena at its back? And I'm saying this team, not this program, but like this team. Will it be a problem for this year's team to do that without Mackey at its back? Or when you get onto neutral courts and you're playing even really good teams, will they find that?
Yeah, and something that gets lost in all of that talk is Purdue led Ohio State in Mackey by 16 and lost.
Yep.
Led Wisconsin by double figures and lost. Led UCLA by 10, I think, at halftime, and squandered the lead before winning eventually with a late flurry. So it's not just in the losses; it's coming up in even games that they win and then find a way to squeak out. So that's concerning to me a little bit, that Purdue can get these double-digit leads and kind of full circle to what we were talking about earlier. You're good enough to do that, but are you consistent enough to do that and then do that against a good team and bury them in the way that you beat Rutgers, that you beat Nebraska at home, even Michigan at home, which was a long time ago now. But that was a game where Purdue got a lead early and just kind of stepped on the team's throat and put it away and gave Michigan no hope of coming back. And that's what you're going to have to do so that when those runs happen, it still doesn't result in Purdue falling behind.
And the game that Friday reminded me of the most, I think, from this season was the Alabama game. Because I thought you had two great teams going head-to-head, high-scoring game, both like pushing each other back and forth. CJ Cox hit some threes midway through the second half of that game that kind of changed it, put Purdue in the lead for good. But it was still like a one-possession game or 4-point game pretty far into that game. And the home crowd, I thought, pushed Purdue over the top. I thought it was a tangible difference in that game. And I thought it was a tangible difference at Illinois, that I thought that crowd is a rowdy crowd. They're a rowdy crowd. And I know in the context of everything that went on with Trakoff and Rim, which I don't think we need to get into today on this, but like, regardless of any of that, it is a spirited crowd, especially when Purdue is there, I think. I mean, there's no love lost between these programs in the last few years. And everybody kind of is around the league was probably kind of tired of getting punched around by Purdue for the last couple of years and looking for a chance to help their team surge. And I thought I felt that happening. Where you sit at Illinois is unique because we're right behind the scorers bench. And there's no other place in the Big Ten that I'm thinking of off the top of my head where you are just down there in it that same way. And it's both like the best and the worst vantage point, especially if you're a little shorter like me and they don't have any plugins for us, but for inside baseball. But from like feeling like you're immersed in the experience of the basketball game, the only thing that comes close to it is, well, it used to be a Big Ten tournament. We're not going to be sitting courtside at a Big Ten tournament anymore. But NCAA tournament, like you're right there along the sidelines and you're in the middle of it. And I felt that Illinois crowd, and I thought I felt it at the most crucial final minutes of that game. Mm-hmm. So if you're telling me that was a factor in yes, you have to find a way to push through that, and great teams find a way to push through that, but it's also hard to push through. And I think if it means that when you get onto a neutral court, some of these things get equalized, whether that's the foul calls, whether that's the home crowd surge. I still think Purdue is in an okay place from that perspective, that there's reasons for optimism as to why this team could, if it figures out some of those things, still get something going here.
Yeah, and Illinois is intimidating, and players even last year when Purdue won came out of that saying, the entire place is draped in orange, and it's just a unique atmosphere, much like Michigan State. You see nothing but white when you're playing there, with all the T-shirts and the students being surrounding the court. So I think it was probably a great, if you were going to draw up a schedule, way to end the regular season, just to go in a hectic environment like that, absorb all of that, and then play well and right in the face of it, and take a lot of positives away from a game that, other than a win, you probably got a lot of the stuff that you wanted to see out of your team if you're a Purdue fan or a Purdue coach or a Purdue player, anyone affiliated with Purdue going into the tournament. Now that can rear its ugly head, and Matt Painter even said, I've seen teams come in here that are really hot and they bow out in the first round of the Big Ten. I've seen teams that come in and they're stinking it up, and they end up making a run. And, I think a 10-seed Ohio State a couple years ago was in the semifinals, for example. So you never know when you get a bunch of teams that know each other well. Well, in the NCAA tournament, you most likely are going to see, at least in the first round, an opponent that you're not familiar with. So now those things kind of maybe work in your favor a little bit. And I think Purdue could be a dangerous team there, just from that aspect, where you've got some star power, you've got some mismatches even against the teams that know you well and scout against you, that should, hopefully for Purdue's sake, elevate you against some of these opponents.
And just to make sure, I don't want people thinking that we're saying that they don't have to be better defensively. They do. They're about to play teams better than Illinois and to have to go far in this. You know what I'm saying? So that has to be better. Everyone around here is, the players and coaches themselves are saying it's got to be better defensively. All I was saying was that, like, imagine it this way. If Purdue were a 3 seed, which is kind of, they have a 3 seed resume that's probably just going to get bumped to a 4 because the teams ahead of them have a better 3 seed resume. But more or less, they have a close to a 3 seed resume, especially if they win a few games this week. And Illinois is probably 6 seed performance wise, but maybe won't get all the way to a 6. So now imagine that, like a 3-6, like that is the kind of team that you're going to see on the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, or a 4-5 situation. If Purdue's in a 4-5 situation, that's the team you're going to face in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And if you tell me that if you take that game and that performance and then correct it for being on a neutral court instead of a visiting court, and I think that does make a difference in terms of the way a game ebbs and flows. I think it makes a difference in terms of foul calls. Then I thought that meant that Purdue is in not a bad shape if they can replicate that performance. The other thing to bring up, though, is that as we said, they haven't always replicated that performance. There have been other times where they are out of it well before the 2.5 minute mark when they had this 4-point lead against Illinois.
Yeah, and think back just before Purdue lost those 4 games in a row and ended the season losing 5 of 7. Purdue's on this long win streak, and everybody thinks, everything's corrected. Caleb Furst came in and kind of made things right with this team, and now everything's corrected. And just when you think that, boom, you lose to Ohio State at home when you had a 16-point lead. Then you end up kind of piling up a few losses with Wisconsin, which was a game I thought Purdue could win, should have probably won.
Yeah.
The Michigan game was back and forth on the road. Michigan stayed on the road. No fault in losing those games, but they were games that were there to be winnable, and Purdue didn't make the winning plays to do so.
I mean, the games that stand out to me, like you cannot be up by 12 and then give up a 28-3 run to Indiana to start the second half. Like that was one that just you've got to have more resolve than that. That was one of the only times where I saw the effort, like not just the execution, but just like almost the effort, the presence really lacked. I thought that team folded a little bit. And I don't know if it was because it was the 4th straight loss and it was just all kind of building on them from a psyche standpoint, but that was the most concerning of all those losses. And then I think you're right. I would say either the Wisconsin game or the Ohio State game. And just think of how different this season could be right now if you just win the Wisconsin game. It means you're a top 4 seed, so they're not playing tomorrow. It might mean that you and Wisconsin, who are now in that 3-4 conversation, are on opposite sides of it. You might be more secure in being a 3 seed for the NCAA tournament, like just getting a couple more stops in that game. But Wisconsin did some tough shots. I mean, they just kind of shot their brains out, shot the crap out of the ball, to use a Braden Smithism, which he's said a few times this year. It's interesting because I was seeing on the social media after the Illinois game, and that's always a dangerous thing because it isn't the whole fan base. It's only sometimes it is the vocal minority. But there's a lot of talk about like another collapse. And I don't think they mean just like at the end of the game defensively. I think maybe they think about like, a team that was in position to be special and then didn't get there. And I still came out of the last 3 games thinking that the way this team responded could be a positive for what's coming next.
Yeah, very much so. And I think for Purdue fans, they're kind of predisposed to when you lose to, double-digit seeds numerous times, as Purdue has over the years. And albeit St. Peter's was in the Sweet 16, it was still a 15 seed that thought it seemed like that was a golden path to the Elite Eight that year. I think you get kind of almost numb to like anything can happen. And then last year happens and Purdue goes to the national championship. And now you get kind of the other side of it. It's like, okay, well, now this team has raised the bar. And now that's maybe the expectation, which it should never be the expectation unless you're a Duke, a UConn type teams like that. It's not the norm to just make runs like that. But I think it did raise the bar a little bit to where Purdue fans think that is possible. That's where this program is now. And you come out and you have a 21-10 season, which is respectable in a lot of ways. A 4 seed in the NCAA tournament is not the worst thing in the world when you lose 2 starters, including a back-to-back National Player of the Year. But I think it's the way that Purdue got to 21-10 with some of the things that we've talked about, the defense, the rebounding, that's maybe more concerning if you're looking for negatives right now.
Well, it's not just the expectations that have been raised over the last couple of years. It's the expectations that were raised this season when they were in first place by themselves and controlled their own destiny to winning a 3rd straight Big Ten championship. And then that's when bang, 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 you lose 4 straight. And they're all going to end up being NCAA tournament teams, and 3 of them were on the road. So that context has to be in there. It's not like they were, the worst performances of the year were still, I don't know how they lost to Penn State the way they did. That's still one that just doesn't make any sense to me. That maybe stands out the most. And then I suppose the Ohio State one at home. But you also have to, I think, remember, I think it's okay to have high expectations, but then also remember that if beating Alabama at home the way that Purdue did was not a negative in Alabama's favor, right? That was an accomplishment that Purdue did to beat a good team like that at home in the final minutes. Then you can't be 180 degrees opposite of that when Purdue loses on the road like it did at Illinois. Again, fix the things that have to be fixed because the next one ends your season. But I still think that it is a team that had to respond after that 4-game losing streak and show competence in important areas. And like we talked about on this pod last week, and they continued it against Illinois, the rebounding had not only become better, but had become kind of a weapon. I think the one thing I did say in that pod was, well, they can't get down in the first half on the boards to Illinois, though. They can't like get beat up on the offensive boards because then the hole's going to be too big. And they didn't. Like that was the first time of those 3 games where from the start of the game, they didn't have a big surge on the offensive boards themselves the way they did against Rutgers and UCLA, but it was stabilized from the whole game. Like that just wasn't a factor in the game really. And the turnovers weren't a factor in the game against a team that is athletic and can definitely get out and run if you start making a bunch of mistakes in the backcourt. And I thought you saw a Purdue team that by and large was pretty confident with how it handled the ball in that game. So I still thought that from a execution standpoint, defense against a really good team being the exception, I thought it was a good response in these final 3 games. And now I think it's about but you still have, what's the next step? Because you're still not the team you need to be if you want this to be a long march.
Yeah, very much so. And what we know right now is Purdue is a very good offensive team, and the metrics say as much. But it's Purdue a very good team overall right now. I guess the verdict is still out on that a little bit, but it could be like, it's all going to be based. People will remember the season based on what happens here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So, now it's kind of go time. And I thought Matt Painter made a very good point. He makes a lot of very good points, but I said something along the lines of, at this point now in the Big Ten tournaments, every opponent because you've seen them before. Do you revert to that? And he was like, now you're going to be playing an opponent, less than 24 hours after they just played a game. They're not going to go back and adjust a bunch of stuff because of who they're playing. Now it's kind of like, you do what you do well and try to get through this week. And then that kind of changes when you get into the NCAA tournament, when your matchups and where, your disadvantages are and your advantages are versus set opponents.
Yeah. And so we had to do predictions. We did predictions that went up on IndyStar.com, JConline.com this week. What was your prediction on what Purdue will do this week?
I said Purdue would get to the semifinal, and I thought that would be a good showing if Purdue does that. Purdue is clearly capable of getting to the championship game, winning the championship even. I think a lot of teams in this tournament are.
Yeah, it's pretty wide open.
But Purdue's also capable of losing to USC or Rutgers or Michigan or, not quite getting in the semifinals. But I think Purdue is a better team than who it will play Thursday. I think Purdue is a better team than Michigan. And then from there, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah, I had the same. I had them losing to Maryland in the semifinals was who I was kind of picking to get there. And some of that was just my having kind of had this thought in my head that maybe Maryland was the team that was kind of could be the buzz team this week. And especially considering their lack of depth, if they got a top 4 seed, that would help them a little bit. I think a semifinal loss could be a positive sign depending on how the loss happens. Do you lose a game where, hey, it was hard fought and sure, you didn't do everything perfect like you wanted to, and you come up a little bit short, but you've at least, given yourself a chance to win. I think that could be positive. I think you lose in the semifinals the way they lost to Indiana or even the way they lost to Michigan State to some extent. I don't know that would be the kind of positive momentum that they want. I think now is about making yourself as hard of an out as possible. Make that other team have to do what Illinois did, which was like really go on a run at the end of a game and surge back and ride the crowd to beat you. And I think if Purdue goes into whoever they're playing in that semifinal, most likely probably either Maryland or Illinois, if they get that far, then I think if you're still in that game in the final 2 minutes, that can be a positive boost, a positive step into then when it really is won or done.
Yeah. And I understand the concept of wanting to win every single game you play. And yes, if you're a competitor, that's what you want to do. But I think there's some value in getting to the semifinal and getting back Sunday, resting, especially if you're going to end up playing on Thursday in the NCAA tournament, just to have the extra. You gain nothing other than playing for a championship, being in the game on Sunday afternoon. And I think that, evidence kind of will show that sometimes these teams who make runs in the conference tournament end up flaming out in the NCAA tournament. But it can go the other way. North Carolina State would not have made the NCAA tournament last year if it didn't win the ACC tournament, and that, ends up being in the Final Four. So it's kind of twofold. But I think, especially in Purdue's case, where a lot of times this year we've heard guys say, I want that extra day of rest, which is why beating Illinois seems so important because Purdue wanted that double bye and not have to play on Thursday. I think there's some, good things to happen for Purdue if you get to Saturday, and even with a loss, you're right. If you go there and get blown out, it's probably a little different. But if you go there, compete, and get a chance to come back, get some rest, and then reassess where you are going into the NCAAs.
I think there's also something that I've kind of got in the back of my head looking at these next couple of weeks is take the last 2 years and set them completely aside, because even if there is some continuation of the players who are on those teams and it's the same program, taking Zach Edey out of the mix makes it so different. And I think all along people thought this year could be good and next year could be great, right? Because then everybody's back again. You're maybe adding in some more pieces. You'll get Daniel Jacobson back. Like even before you knew he was going to be hurt, it was going to be second year Daniel Jacobson. You thought, okay, next year that could really be the year that they make another run. And I think we've seen in Big Ten history, I remember when Wisconsin had Frank Kaminsky, and I remember being at my fantasy baseball draft up in March and watched some games that year with some guys and saying something like, oh, that's a team like I would put like next year, I think the odds are going to be really good. I would get Final Four odds on Wisconsin getting the Final Four next year. And I was wrong. The odds were terrible because they made the Final Four that year. Like sometimes you get there, a team is already becoming what it's going to be by the end of a season. The lack of Jacobson is the big X factor here. But I think over these next 2 weeks, Purdue would need to start showing that either it can be that thing, that entity that maybe, and it's going to probably be a lot of what you see from the supporting players coming through, which we've started to see more again here in these last couple of weeks, that would maybe make the difference between whether they're ready to do that or whether that is still several months away before they can play at that level. And then obviously just matchups will matter.
Yeah, very much so. With that said, I've got to get to a Purdue baseball game.
Oh, sorry.
Boilermaker baseball is off to a hot start for those who aren't following, but we'll be chatting it up and covering Purdue with the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis this week. And then our next destination beyond that, we don't know. We'll find out on Sunday, as will the Boilermakers, as will every team that makes the NCAA tournament or doesn't make the NCAA tournament. So several more content, much more content, several more podcasts probably to come here in the coming weeks.
Yep. Stay tuned. We'll be back with you probably before the end of the weekend, certainly after Selection Sunday at the very latest. And we'll be talking more basketball. Thanks a lot.